Okay. So for the last topic, we will cover other percentage taxes. No? Yung provisions ng National Internal Revenue Code on other percentage taxes covers Section 116 to 127 of the tax code. Now, we will start with the first provision, and that is Section 116. Now, Section 116 is titled Tax on Persons Exempt from Value-Added Tax. Before we read the entire provision, you will recall that we have studied before yung mga transactions which are exempt from value-added tax, particularly Section 109. To refresh our memory, no, meron tayong binanggit doon from letter A to letter double A, no, starting with agricultural and marine food products in their original state, fertilizer, feed, seedlings, fingerlings, and feeds including ingredients, etc. etc. Na, yun ba yung tinutukoy dito sa section 116? Yung enumeration from the A to double B. Kasi if that is the case, it would imply that if a transaction is exempt from value-added tax as provided by Section 109, the taxpayer will be subjected to 3% percentage tax under Section 116. Is that a correct conclusion? The answer is hindi. Why? Sabi ng Section 116, any person whose sales or receipts are exempt under Section 109 double B. Double B lang yung in-identify niya. So sa lahat ng naka-enumerate under Section 109, ang kanya lang in-identify dito ay yung double B lang. If you will have the opportunity to go back to the discussion on VAT-exempt transactions, hindi ko diniscuss yung double B doon. The reason being is that the discussion on Section 109 double B will be the same discussion for Section 116 of the tax code. So dito ko siya i-discuss. So in Section 109 double B, doon ka covered. Okay. From the payment of the tax code, from the payment of the VAT, and who is not a VAT registered person shall pay a tax equivalent to 3% of his gross quarterly sales or receipts, provided that cooperatives shall be exempt from the payment of the 3% percentage tax imposed by Section 116. Okay, let's discuss Section 109 muna. Let's go back to Section 109. Di ba meron dong agricultural and marine food products, services provided by educational institutions, medical institutions, publications, regional area headquarters, etc. etc. So naka-enumerate yun doon. So if your business, no, if your activity, if your if the nature of your business is not among those listed from double A to double A, from A to double A, does it mean na wala ka ng paraan para maging exempt from value-added tax? Yun ba yung ibig sabihin noon? So for example, ang gusto mong business ay magbenta ng sardinas o mag-operate ka for example ng convenience store, mga ganyan, convenience store, mini pure gold, ganyan, etc. etc. Kung ano man yung um, gusto mong itawag dyan sa tindahan, convenience store. Okay. So, pag binasa natin yung section A to double A of the tax code, of section 109 of the tax code, wala kang madadaanan doon na convenience store. Na wala. Hindi ko uulitin yung A to double A. Pero wala talagang convenience store doon. Dahil walang convenience store sa section 109, does it mean na automatic vatable ka? Yan. The answer is hindi. Kasi under section 109, from A to double A, meron akong, tinatawag ko siyang catch-all provision. Catch-all provision. What do you mean by catch-all provision? Or fallback provision, pwede rin. Kapag ganyan, ang ibig sabihin ko doon ay kung ang isang transaction ay hindi exempt from A to double A, maaari pa rin siyang maging exempt from value-added tax by using double B. Section 109 double B. Kaya lang, itong Section 109 double B ay nagli-lead sa isa pang provision ng tax code which is Section 116. So in relation to Section 109 double B, you have Section 116 of the tax code. Although exempt ka from value-added tax as provided by Section 109 double B, you are liable to the 3% percentage tax under Section 116. Okay. So nagtuturuan sila. Tinuturo ng Section 100, sabi ng Section 109, taxpayer, ang business mo ba ay nakapaloob mula dun sa letter A, agricultural and marine food products hanggang dun sa double A? Ang sagot mo, wala po. O, wala. Gusto mo pa rin ba maging tax exempt? Ang tanong ng Section 109, yes po. Ayoko po maging liable sa VAT. I want to be VAT exempt. Okay, you might make use of Section 109 double B. Ano pong kailangan kong gawin para ma-entitle po ako sa Section 109 double B? You look at the requirements of Section 116. Kasi dun sa 116, meron siyang dalawang requirements. Ano yun? Sabi niya, non-VAT registered ka, yan, non-VAT registered, not a VAT registered person, and you are covered by 109. Ano ba nakalagay sa 109? Dapat hindi ka lumalagpas ng 3 million. So in effect, naiwan yung mga annotations. In effect, Section 116 requires these two elements. Una, the taxpayer must be non-VAT registered. That's the first requirement. And then the second requirement is that the taxpayer's gross sales or gross receipts in any 12-month period should not exceed 3 million pesos. Bakit ito yung mga requirements? So, isipin natin kung bakit nga ba ito yung mga requirements natin. Una, yung requirement number 1, the taxpayer must be non-VAT registered. Kasi kung siya ay VAT registered, obviously, the tax liability of that taxpayer will be value-added tax. So kung ayaw mo maging, ang gusto mo nga mangyari is ma-exempt ka from VAT. Kapag nagpa-register ka as a VAT taxpayer, it follows na ang gusto mong liability, unless you will engage nga in exempt transactions. Pero ang gusto mong, ang magiging liability mo as a general rule will be value-added tax. So if you want to avail, if you want to be covered by Section 116 of the tax code, you must be non-VAT registered. Kasi magiging contradicting yung position mo na makover, yung kagustuhan mo na makover ng Section 116 kung in the first place ay VAT registered ka naman. Kasi again, kung VAT registered ka, you will be liable for the value-added tax regardless of the amount of your gross sales or gross receipts. Okay? So kung non-VAT registered ka, that's only the first requirement. Yung pangalawa, the taxpayer's gross sales or gross receipts in any 12-month period should not exceed 3 million pesos. Ano ngayon? Ba't ganun yung requirement? Ba't kailangan hindi lumagpas ng 3 million pesos? Again, under the TRIN law, this threshold amount was adjusted by the TRIN law. Under the TRIN law, kapag lumagpas ka ng 3 million pesos, you are mandatorily required to register under the VAT system. And if you are mandatorily required to register under the VAT system, you will be liable for the value-added tax. So if you want that you are not covered, kung ang kagustuhan mo ay hindi ka covered ng VAT system, dapat hindi ka lalagpas in any 12-month period, dapat hindi ka lalagpas ng 3 million pesos na threshold. Kasi ang effect, kahit isa lang dito sa dalawang ito, ang hindi mo ma-comply, nagiging VAT-able taxpayer ka. Hindi mo na-comply yung 1, ang requirement is taxpayer must be non-VAT registered. Pero VAT registered ka. Sa ano magiging effect nun? You will be subject sa VAT. You cannot avail of Section 116. Requirement number 2 is that the gross sales or gross receipts in any 12-month period should not exceed the 3 million threshold amount. Lumagpas ka ng 3 million threshold amount. Ano mangyayari? You are mandatorily required to register under the VAT system. So, vatable ka. So para mag-apply yung Section 116, dapat hindi ka VAT registered at hindi ka lalagpas ng 3 milyong piso in any 12-month period. Okay. Section 116 covers 2 transactions. Meron tayong sale of goods here. Meron din tayong sale of services. Na-distinguish natin to before, no? Nung tayo nag-discuss ng value-added tax, nagko-compute tayo ng output tax. Di ba tinatanong natin, saan mo multiply yung 12%? Aba, depende yan. Depende kung goods or services. Kapag goods ang ano mo, ang subject matter ng business mo, then the 3% will be based on gross sales, pero binanggit ko nga sa inyo that these gross sales ay actually net of the returns, allowances, and discounts. And gross sales is revenue measured using accrual method, meaning as long as you have already entered into the sale transaction, kahit hindi mo pa nakokolekta yung amount or for the consideration of the products or the goods that you sold, you are already required to compute for the percentage tax on the transaction. And then the source document, as I have mentioned before, is that the document to be issued to prove this transaction ay sales invoice. Okay? Ang pinagkaiba niyan sa Section 116, although 3% din naman ito, the 3% is computed based on gross receipts, which is revenue measured using cash method. So na-figure out na natin to before. Pag sinabing cash method, dapat yung amount of collected, the amount of the revenue actually collected. Kasi kung hindi pa siya nakokolekta, it cannot be subject of the percentage tax under Section 116 kung ikaw ay nagpo-provide ng serbisyo. The same way, returns, allowances, and discounts are all deductible. And with respect to the issuance of source document, the document which will prove that there is a transaction between the taxpayer and the client, the taxpayer must issue an official receipt. So ito, same lang naman ito nung nag-distinguish tayo ng seller of goods and seller of services for purposes of computing the value-added tax, particularly the in-output tax. Okay? So we have here an illustrative problem. Meron siyang cash sales, account sales, cost of sales, returns, allowances, and discounts, accounts receivable beginning, accounts receivable ending. Magkano daw ang percentage tax if seller of goods siya? Magkano ang percentage tax kung siya ay seller of service? Walang problema with the rate. Parehas ito whether goods or service, ang kanyang tax rate ay magkano? Ang kanyang tax rate ay 3%. Okay, ang problema natin, ang tawag dito, ang challenge sa atin ay alamin kung saan i-multiply itong 3% na ito. Oh, alam naman natin lahat na tawag dito. Okay, so kung ikaw ay may cash, ito yung yung problem kanina. So kung medyo biglang nag-transition, i-back nyo lang ng konti and then i-pause ninyo for you to have a better view or recall of the problem. Now, kung ikaw ay seller of goods, ang computation mo will be 500,000 is already covered by your percentage tax. Account sales will also be covered kasi nga accrual basis. ito ay hindi kasama sa computation. Returns, allowances, and discounts will be deducted. The beginning balances of receivable, beginning and ending balances of the receivable will not be taken into consideration. So, ang iyong taxable base ay 675,000. You multiply it by 3%, you will get 20,250. This is our answer for the first problem. Kung services ka naman, you have to determine the collection. Ito, cash sales ito, kaya nakolekta na yan. For the account sales, you have to add it, i-add mo siya, pero maapektuhan yan ng beginning balance ng receivable and ending balance ng receivable. Yung returns, allowances, and discounts will still be deductible. So, ito na ngayon yung collection mo net of the returns, allowances, and discounts. Yung cost of sales or cost of goods sold ay hindi pa rin siya deductible. So, ang taxable base natin ay 655,000 multiplied by 3%, we will arrive at 19,650. Okay? So that's it for section 116. Let us now go to the next section, which is section 117 and section 118. So section 117 is percentage tax on domestic carriers and keepers of garages. Domestic carriers and keepers of garages. Again, anong tayo nag-discuss doon sa value added tax? Sabi ko sa inyo, may mga meron tayong portion doon na touch upan natin yung percentage tax liability. So ito yon, section 117 and section 118. Again, if you need to recall, meron akong prepare na guide, although again, medyo maano siya, malawak, medyo malaki yung guide na yon. Pero after the discussion on this one, it is advisable that you go back to that video. I'm just not familiar kung nasaan talaga siya. Pero among those videos, meron tayong din-discuss about common carriers or the transportation business. Now, section 117 is percentage tax on domestic carriers. So cars for rent or for hire driven by the lessee, transportation contractors, including persons who transport passengers for hire, and other domestic carriers by land for the transport of passengers. So domestic carriers by land. So importante yan. Domestic carriers by land. Dapat nandoon siya for the transport of passengers. Ito naman, except for owners of bangka, syempre by land nga eh. Diba? Ba't mo naman i-cover yung bangka kung by land naman ito? And owners of animal-drawn two-wheeled vehicles. So kapag ang sasakyan mo, ang nagpapagana dyan ay isang hayop at hatak-hatak niya yung hayop, hindi ka covered ng section 117. But 117 will have to include keepers of garages and they shall pay a tax of 3%. So from 116 na 3%, 117 is also 3%. 3% of their quarterly gross receipts. But the next paragraph mentions that, the last paragraph mentions that the percentage tax provided by section 117 shall be subject to the minimum quarterly gross receipts, which we will discuss later on. Yung second, yung nasa gitnang paragraph, the gross receipts of common carriers derived from their incoming and outgoing freight shall not be subject to local taxes as provided by the local government code. Okay? So that is section 117. And we will make a distinction between 117 and 118 actually. So section 118, this one is percentage tax on international carriers. Ito, domestic carriers. Ito, international carriers. So you have international air carriers doing business in the Philippines on their processes derived from transport of cargo. Ito, transport of passenger. Ito, transport of cargo from the Philippines to a foreign country, to another country. We shall pay a tax of 3%. So, ganun pa rin naman. 116, 117, 118, lahat sila 3%. Letter B, international shipping carriers doing business in the Philippines on their processes derived from the transport of cargo uli from the Philippines to a foreign country, Philippines to a foreign country. pay a tax to equivalent to 3% pa rin of their quarterly gross receipts. So parehas lang 3%. Whether international air carrier ka or international shipping carrier ka, you are liable under Section 118 if your business pertains to what what is indicated in this particular provision or specific provision of the tax code. Now here, we will make a distinction between Section 117 and Section 118 para malinaw sa lahat. First distinction, nasaan yung biyahe? Section 117 mentions domestic transportation only from one point in the Philippines to another point in the Philippines. Dito ka lang sa Pilipinas. Huwag kang lalabas. Yun yung Section 117. Parang si Kim Chu, no? Bawal lumabas. Section 117. Yung 118, nag-comply na yan. No? Yung 118 kasi, ay, pwede ka na palang lumabas. Sabi niya. International transportation only. From the Philippines to a foreign country. Philippines to abroad. So, importante itong distinction na to. Kasi kung hindi ito, yung kanilang transportation, don't apply Section 117 and 118. Domestic transportation only for 117. International outbound, palabas, transportation only for Section 118. Second distinction, mode of transportation. Section 117 will cover only land transportation. Okay? Although may domestic transportation by air or by water, di ba kasi sa number 1 natin, domestic transportation only siya. Overland. Meron domestic transportation by water, may domestic transportation by air. But those are not covered by Section 117. Those will be covered by VAT, Value Added Tax. Unless they are VAT exempt and their gross receipts will not exceed Section 1 will not exceed 3 million, in which case they will be covered by Section 116. Anyway, going back to Section 117, overland dapat. As opposed to Section 118, ito kasi obvious ito. Sinabi ko na to sa inyo before when we were discussing the business of transportation. Kapag international transportation, ibig sabihin palabas ng bansa, walang choice kundi dumaan sa himpapawid or sa karagatan. Dahil walang paraan para makalabas ka ng bansa by land. It should be by air or by water. Pero yung 117, hindi pwede ang air or water. If air or water yan, it will be covered by value-added tax. Number 3 will cover the transportation of passengers only. So hindi pwedeng makover ng Section 117 yung transportation of goods, cargo, mail, baggage, etc. etc. 117 ay pang pasahero lamang. Wala nang ibang pwedeng i-cover ang 117. As opposed to 118, kahit ano, basta hindi pasahero. It may be goods, it may be cargo, it may be mail, it may be baggage, it may be anything. Basta hindi pasahero. Ang pasahero, usapang pasahero ay 117. Ano pong mangyayari kapag sa 117, instead of passenger, ibang bagay, hindi pasahero? It will be covered by value-added tax. Ano pong mangyayari sa Section 118? Kung ang binyahe palabas ng bansa ay pasahero, it will be exempt from VAT under Section 109 letter S. Transportation by foreign companies or foreign airline companies palabas ng bansa ng pasahero ay exempt from value-added tax. Okay? Number 4, sa kabila, domestic common carrier dapat sa 117. Sa 118, ang nationality niya, foreign common carrier. Ano pong mangyayari kung ang nag-transport palabas ng bansa sa number 4 ay isang domestic common carrier? Ang resulta ay magiging zero-rated yung transaction. Magiging zero-rated. Pag ito ay instead of foreign, yung nababasa yung foreign ngayon dito, kung yan ay naging domestic, then ang effect ay magiging zero-rated yung transaction. And then last distinction, Section 117 mentions that the 3% percentage tax under Section 117 is subject to minimum gross receipts. Under Section 118, there's no such minimum. Ano ibig sabihin ng minimum dito? Section 117 kasi covers domestic transportation by land of passengers undertaken by domestic common carrier. The best example for 117 ay jeepney. Jeepney drivers and operators. So kung jeepney driver operator ka, you are covered by 117. Domestic transportation ka, overland, passengers, and then domestic common carrier ka. Approve na approve ang mga jeepney drivers and operators under Section 117. Pero ba't siya may minimum gross receipt? So just imagine, Kung ikaw ay jeepney driver operator, sasabihin ng BIR sa'yo, oy, manong driver, manong operator. You are covered by Section 117 and you are liable for the 3% percentage tax. Please pay your tax. Okay, magkano po? 3% ng alin po? Ng kinita nyo po ninyo for the quarter. Magkano yan? 500 pesos po. Tataka ngayon yung BIR, 500. Isang quarter, 500. Ba't di pa kayo tumigil? Diba? Kung totoong 500 yan, tumigil na kayo. Although hindi naman ganun yung BIR. Pero yun nga, meron siyang professional skepticism. Totoo ba yun? Totoo ba? 500 pesos lang kinita niya for the entire quarter. Totoo ba yun? Patunayan mo naman. Ano pong patunay? Magbigay, nasan yung resibo? Kasi the resibo will prove the transaction, di ba? Pag nakabenta ako, issue akong resibo. Pag nag-render ako ng service, binayaran ako, issue akong resibo. Sabi ng BIR ko, patunay mo na 500 lang, nasan yung resibo na 500 lang talaga? Yung kinita mo for the quarter. Sabihin niya, wala. Jeepney driver ako, ba't mag-issue ng resibo? Which is correct. Diba kung ikaw isang jeepney driver, it would amount to negligence kung mag-issue ka ng resibo. Kapabayaan yun. No? Nagda-drive ka, tapos nag-aasikaso ka na mag-issue ng resibo. Pag may nag-abot ng bayad, bayad po, 20 pesos, tatanungin, kanino to? Pakisabi yung complete name, sulat mo, address po, tapos identification number. Sulat siya ngayon. Saan nagpunta? Saan galing? Saan papunta? Ito ngayon yan. Bibigay mo ngayon, pakipirmahan na lang. Pakikuha yung white copy, yung blue tsaka pink, pakibalik sa akin. Ang tagal nun. Tapos pagbalik nun sa driver, biglang magre-reklamo yung sumakay. Manong nakalimutan nyo yung student discount ko. Balik na naman, ulit na naman. And at the same time, habang ginagawa niya, nag-drive pa siya. Tawag pa siya ng pasahero. Tumatanggap pa siya ng ibang bayad. Ang dami niyang ginagawa, multitasking. To the max. Again, delikado actually. Delikado for jeepney drivers for them to be required to issue official receipt. So ano ngayon magiging basehan ng BIR? Paano ko ngayon may ensure na totoong 500 lang yung kanyang kinita for the entire quarter? Sabi ng tax code, don't worry, meron tayong tinatawag na minimum gross receipts. Ibig sabihin ng minimum gross receipts, kahit na pag nag-declare siya ng actual, you compare. Ito nga yung minimum So you compare with the minimum. And you will see na kung mas mataas yung minimum, then disregard the actual. Ganun gumagana yung minimum gross receipts. Tignan mo to, then you disregard yung actual kung mas mataas to. So to simplify, yung minimum gross receipts, ang gagawin mo lang dyan, quarterly yan. You compare, you ask the taxpayer, magkano ba yung kanyang actual na gross receipts for the quarter, and then you compare that with the minimum. Kung mas mataas yung minimum, syempre, yun yung dapat na maging basihan ng kanyang 3% percentage tax under Section 117. Section 118, walang ganon. Hindi nag-a-apply yung mga minimum gross receipts for Section 118. Okay? So, meron tayo ditong, bago natin ituloy yon, ganito yung minimum gross receipts. Teka lang. Ayan. So, base siya sa kung anong uri ng sasakyan. Kung anong uri ng common carrier. So, we have here, yan. We have here jeep, PUB, public utility bus, taxi, and then car for hire. Jeep, bus, taxi, car for hire. And then yung jeep ay naka-subclassify into two. Merong provincial, merong Manila. Depende yung biyahe. Provincial, Manila, or other major cities. Yung public utility bus ay nakadepende sa seating capacity. Not exceeding 30, 31 to 50, and then exceeding 50. Yung taxi, depende sa biyahe, provincial, tsaka Manila. And then yung car for hire ay depende kung may chauffeur. Chauffeur. Saan naman basa dyan? Without chauffeur. Yan. Um, French ata, no? Mukhang French yung salita na yan. Pero sa Pilipinas, walang ibang basa dyan kundi chauffeur. Yan, chauffeur. Walang chauffeur, merong chauffeur. Driver ng car for hire. So, doon yung arrangement niya. Hindi ganito yung presentation sa tax code. Pero para maalala niyo yung quarterly gross receipts, minimum gross receipts, dapat yung arrangement nyo. Jeep, PUB, taxi, car for hire. And then yung Jeep, Provincial Manila, taxi, Provincial Manila. Yung PUB, not more than 30, 31 to 50, more than 50. Yung car for hire, without chauffeur, with chauffeur. Okay, and then you start, ito na yung mga amount. Yung mga amount ay expressed in yan, thousands. In pesos yan, quarterly yan lahat. You start with, disregard nyo muna yan. Ito yung magiging, guide natin. You start with the VAT rate. And the VAT rate is 12%. And then you double the VAT rate. 12 plus 12, double, 24. And then you now have two numbers, you add them. 12 and 24 will make 36. And then i-add mo tong dalawa. 24 plus 36 ay 60. And then i-add mo tong dalawa. That would give 72. And then itong pinagdugtong mo ng tong dalawa na to, kokopyahin mo sila. 24 and then 36. Yan. 12 plus times 1.5. Bakit times 1.5? Wala lang, no? Para lang makuha mo yung kasunod. 12 times 1.5, 18. And then 18 plus 12, 30. And then you add 2 zeros. 1, 2, 2, 4, 3, 6, 6,000, 7, 2, 2, 4, 3, 6, 1, 8, and then 3,000. Dadagdagan mo lang dalawang zero lahat. Ayan. To arrive at the minimum gross receipts. Ulit. 12 plus 12, 24. 24 plus 12, 36. 24 plus 36, 60. 60 plus 12, 72. 72. Yung dalawang may guhit, 24. Ito, nasa loob. 24, tapos 36. 12 times 1.5, 18. 18 plus 12, 30. So yun yung minimum gross receipts. Iko-compare mo yan ngayon doon sa actual na problem, whichever is higher. Kaya lang with the problems, most of the time yung mga problems sobrang tataas, hindi masyadong nagmamatter ito. Pag nakita kayo ng problem involving section 117, tapos ang pinakamababa ay 10,000, most probably hindi mag-a-apply. But anyway, it is more prudent na alam nyo to kung paano ba i-memorize itong minimum gross receipts na yan. Okay? Okay, so now we are back with the comparison. Okay na tayo dito. Section 117 and 118. So you have a bus with 30 passengers. So ito, just by looking at the amount, alam ko na walang mean. Kasi yung pinakamataas na minimum gross receipts is 7.2. Yan, yung pinakamataas. So, since wala namang lower than 7.2 dito, hindi mag-a-apply yan. Anyway, from the above receipts, 70% came from transport of passengers, while the rest came from the transport of goods and baggage. How much is the business tax still due for the month? Bus, yan, okay na tayo dyan. Bus with 30 passengers, bus with 80 passengers, jeepney from Manila to Bulacan and vice versa, and then total expenses for gasoline. Okay? So if you want to solve the problem, you can pause right now kasi after this, we will be answering this problem. So ito yung magiging solution natin. So yung una, we have to determine magkano yung portion nitong kinita niya ang tawag dito, ang passengers, ang pag-transport ng passengers at alin ang pag-transport ng cargo. So malinaw naman 70%, so simple lang multiplied by 70%. So ito rin, ganun din ang mangyayari. Ito naman multiplied by 30%. So ganun din yung mangyayari. So magkano ngayon ang total ng collection niya for the transport of passengers at magkano ang magiging total ng collection niya from the transport of goods. For the taxpayer to be covered by Section 117, dapat passengers lang. Yung goods hindi kasama. Kaya wala siya dito. So for the percentage tax liability, ang total nito 41, 20, 56,000 and 109,620. 3% of that is 3,288 and 60. Okay? Disregard nyo muna ito. So yun yung kanyang percentage tax. Kasi yun lang yung with respect to the transportation of passengers. Now yung 30%, which is with respect to transportation of goods, ito siya. Ang total niyang nakolekta ay 46,980. So ano ang tax na ipapato dito? VAT yan. 12% VAT. Unless the problem will inform you, will provide the information that the taxpayer is non-VAT registered and hindi siya lumalagpas ng 3 million in any 12-month period, in which case covered siya ng Section 116. Pero kung walang ganong information, wala kang basihan to apply Section 116. But ang i-apply mo. So 46,980 times 12% will give us 5,637.6. Ito ay output tax lamang. Dapat merong input. Saan mong gagaling yung input dun sa gasoline? Sabi ng problem, bumili daw siya ng gasoline worth 20,000, exclusive of the VAT. So ang input tax doon ay 2,400. Kaya lang itong gasolina na ito ay ginamit niya para mag-transport ng pasero at ng goods. So anong gagawin mo? Yung portion ng input tax, yung portion ng 2,400 na ma-allocate mo doon sa transportation niya ng passengers ay hindi niya pwedeng i-claim as input tax. Kasi ang input ay maaari lamang ibawas sa output at wala ng iba. Since yung transport ng passengers ay percentage tax, hindi ka pwedeng magbawas ng input tax on percentage tax. What you have to do is to allocate. So ito, 2,400 multiplied by 109,620 divided by 156,660. And then 2,400 times 46,980 divided by 156,600. So ito lang ang pwede niyang ibawas by way of input tax. 720 pesos. Ito yung input. Allocated na. Prorated input tax. So i-deduct mo yung 720 from 5,637.6, that will give you 4,917.60. This is the answer for goods. Ito na yung sagot mo sa goods. Okay? Now let's go to sections 1.1. A problem naman for 118. So you have here gross receipts from transport of passengers, gross receipts from transport of cargo, receivable from transport of cargo, gas, oil repairs, and maintenance. How much is the business tax if the transportation is international, palabas ng bansa, and the taxpayer is domestic? Magkano pa rin? Same business tax if the transportation is international and the taxpayer is unforeign, is a foreign common carrier, is a foreign, nakainis yung mga mali-maling spelling, is a foreign common carrier. Wrong grammar pala. Grammatically incorrect. How much is the business tax still due for the month if the taxpayer is, if the transportation is domestic and the taxpayer is a domestic carrier. Domestic siya. Okay, so yun yung mga kailangan nating masagutan. Again, if you want to compute on your own, please pause the video because after this, problem solving na agad. So ito na yung ating computation. First, transportation is international, the taxpayer is domestic. So ito, yung transport of passengers will be zero rated. Talagang nag-compute pa ako. Transport of cargo will also be zero rated. Yung receivable, dinisregard na natin, tinanggal ko na siya dito sa computation. Kasi dahil servisyo ito, kailangan yung actual collection ang makuha natin. Gas, oil, repairs, and maintenance. Meron siyang input tax dyan at the rate of 144,000. Gawin natin negative kasi input tax ito. So dahil ang kanyang transport of passengers and cargo ay mga zero-rated transaction. Bakit zero-rated ito? Kasi taxpayer is domestic. Zero-rated siya, tapos meron ang input tax kung zero-rated. Ano to? VAT refundable. Yan. Di ba sabi natin, kapag ang input tax mo ay allocated or being offset from or deducted from zero-rated transactions, the negative amount can be refunded. You can apply for a tax refund. Sunod, transportation is international, taxpayer is foreign. Letter D naman is covered by Section 118. Ito mismo yon. Kaya lang itong portion na ito ay exempt. This one is exempt under Section 109. Ito exempt under Section 109. Letter S. Yan. Ito, processes from transport of cargoes. This one is subject to 3%. 3% under what provision? Section 118. Pag transport of cargo undertaken by a foreign airline company, whether by air or by sea, as long as the transportation is international, 3% percentage tax under Section 118 will apply. How about the input tax on the gas, oil, repair, and maintenance? Is that deductible? No, not deductible. Why? Because this input tax, it can only be deducted from output tax. Since the 150,000 amount here is what is a percentage tax and not value-added tax, not output tax, the amount of output tax, which is 144,000, input tax rather, the amount of input tax, which is 144,000, is not deductible. Okay? And then finally, we have transportation is domestic, the taxpayer is domestic. So kung ganyan, ito, 2 million ay subject sa 3% percentage tax. By air ba to or by sea? Check ko lang ha. By air and sea siya. Okay. So kung by air and sea ito, hindi ito mag-a-apply. Hindi 117 ang mag-a-apply, kundi value-added tax times 12%. Ito, kung by air and sea ito, times 12% din. Pero tandaan, itong 2 million na ito, kung ito ay by land, transportation domestic, taxpayer domestic by land, 3% percentage tax under 117. Pero dahil ang pinag-uusapan dito ay by air or by sea, then ito ay 12% VAT. 12%, 12%. So meron ka ngayong input tax na 144,000. Tama ba yan? Tama. So 696 will be subject to, ito yung VAT payable mo. 696,000. Okay, again, if ito ay by land, itong 240 ay mawawala. Magiging siya, percentage tax siya under Section 117. Tapos itong 144,000 mo, ipoprorate mo siya. Kasi hindi lahat ginamit for vatable transactions eh. So ipoprorate mo siya between transport of cargo and transport of passenger to determine yung toong VAT liability. Pero dahil nga ito ay air and sea transportation, then okay na tong computation natin. Okay? So that's it for section 117 and section 118. Now, section 119, franchise tax. And a provision of general special law to the contrary, etc., etc. Sabi niya dito, meron daw franchise tax. Wait lang. Wait lang. Meron daw franchise tax on gas and water utility. Meron daw franchise tax on TV and radio broadcasting. Pero meron silang threshold na 10 million. Okay. Bago tayo mag-proceed, tayo ay mag-aral ng mabuti patungkol dito sa bagay na ito. Tandaan, meron kang dito, dalawang threshold. Meron kang 3 million na threshold, meron kang 10 million na threshold. Yung 3 million, ito yung regular na threshold natin. So meaning kung ang iyong kita ay nandito, dyan sa portion na yan, hindi ka lumalagpas ng 3 million, then you can be non-VAT registered. You can register your business as non-VAT registered taxpayer, and then you will be liable for the 3% percentage tax. But if you want, it is an option for you to be registered under the VAT system, in which case, you will be liable for the 12% value added tax. The good thing with that registration is that you will be allowed to claim your input taxes. May-utilize mo na yung mga input tax mo. However, once you elected to be VAT registered, that election is not revocable for a period of 3 years. So you have to wait for 3 years before you will be allowed to revert back to being non-VAT registered. Okay. Kung ikaw ay basta hindi ka TV, hindi ka radio, ha? Kung ikaw ay hindi TV, hindi radio, at ikaw ay nandito, hindi ka TV, hindi radio, ikaw ay nandito, lumagpas ka, then you are mandatorily required to register under the VAT system. Alam na natin yun. Pag lumagpas ka ng 3 million threshold, alam na natin. VAT registered ka. Itong 10 million na ito ay nag-a-apply lang sa TV and radio. Meron silang kakaibang threshold, 10 million. So kung ikaw ay TV at radio at ikaw hindi lumalagpas ng 10 million, andito ka lang, hindi ka lumalagpas ng 10 million, you can register as a non-VAT taxpayer. And you will be liable for the 3% percentage tax under section 119. But if you want, ganun uli, if you want, you can voluntarily register under the VAT system. The problem with that, unlike dun sa 3 million na threshold na irrevocable for 3-year period, pag TV and radio broadcasting ka, once you elect to be subjected to the value-added tax, that option is irrevocable forever. So hindi mo na siya pwedeng palitan. Unlike dun sa 3 million na threshold, maghintay ka lang ng 3 taon, pwede ka na makabalik sa non-VAT registration mo. But with TV and radio, once you elect to be subjected to the 12% VAT, kasi ikaw ay nag-volunteer under the VAT system, then that option is irrevocable for a period of 3 years. 3 years mo siyang titiisin. Tama. Ano ba? TV and radio, forever pala. Pag TV and radio, 10 million ang threshold mo, hindi ka umaabot pero gusto mong mag-VAT register, mag-register under the VAT, then forever mong bibit-bitin yung VAT registration ngayon. Kung TV and radio ka, tapos ang kita mo ay laging lagpas ng 10 million, doon ka, you are mandatorily required to register under the VAT system. In which case, 12% VAT yung liability mo. Okay? Okay. Tandaan ninyo na itong tax on franchise ay applicable lamang or imposable lamang on the business covered by the law granting the franchise. Ibig sabihin, yung 3% percentage tax on TV and radio, 2% percentage tax on gas and water, tama ba ito? Gas and water utility ay ipinapataw lamang doon sa kinikita nila in the exercise of their franchise. Ibig sabihin dapat may kinalaman doon sa kanilang primary purpose, no, na mag-provide ng gas and water utility or mag-provide ng serbisyo using their radio and TV franchise. If they will engage in other activities, yung gas and water utility nagpapaupa ng building, for example, yung radio broadcasting network ay nagpapaupa, for example, din ng building, then rental income yon na walang kinalaman sa nature ng business nila as gas and water, TV, and radio. So, yung rental income na yan is not covered by the franchise. Therefore, it cannot be covered by the franchise tax. Okay? I hope that is clear. So, yung computation mo for the franchise tax ay limited lamang on the exercise of the franchise. Section 119, problem. So, billings and activities covered by the franchise, billings and activities not covered by the franchise, input tax on items purchased. Of the above billings, 70% were collected. 70% were collected during the month. Okay? So, you can pause and you can, meron pa ba mga tanong dito? Magkano ang tax kung siya ay gas franchisee, radio franchisee, electricity franchisee, and PAGCOR franchisee? You can pause the video if you want to answer, and if not, you can just wait for the solution. So ito yung computation natin. Ito yung billings niya on activities covered by the franchise, 700. Billings on activities not covered by the franchise, 800,000. And the 50,000 input tax on items purchased. Dahil tayo ay nagpo-provide ng serbisyo, kailangan natin ma-compute yung collection niya. Sabi ng problem, 70% ang nakolekta. So 490 ang collections niya on the franchise, 560 ang collections niya on activities not covered by the franchise. Kung ikaw ay gas franchisee, itong 490 na kolekta mo on your franchise will be subjected to 2% franchise tax. Itong activities not covered by the franchise will be covered by value-added tax. So dalawa yung liability mo. Those covered by the franchise, 98. Not covered by the franchise, VAT yun, 67,200. But this one is only the output tax. Meron kang input in the amount of 50,000. Kaya lang, dahil nga itong 50,000 ay ginamit for both vatable and non-vatable activities, kailangan mo siyang i-prorate. So 50,000 multiplied by vatable activity na 560 over non-vatable activity 10 ay total activity 1050 whether VAT or non-VAT. Okay? So ang pwede niyang i-claim na input tax ay 266,667. So ang franchise tax niya ay 98 without any deduction for input tax kasi nga hindi naman yan output VAT at yung kanyang VAT payable ay 26,656.67. Kung radio franchisee siya, itong 490 ay subject sa 3% percentage tax under Section 119. Itong not covered by the franchise will be subjected to 12% percentage tax, ay value-added tax. The same way, kailangan niyang mag-compute ng prorated VAT, 50,000 multiplied by 560 divided by 1050. Same answer. The franchise tax will be 14,700, where the VAT payable will be the difference between output na 67,200 and input na 26,667. Ba't ganun yung sagot? 4530, but ito magkaiba? So mali ang computation. 67,2 minus 26,667. So seeing 40,533.33. For electricity, sabi natin kapag kuryente ka, lahat ng activity mo ay subjected to 12% VAT. So ang gagawin mo lang, Dito na ako magko-compute, 1,050,000 times 12%, 126,000. Itong 50,000 niya ay hindi mo kailangang i-prorate kasi lahat naman batable. Franchise tax niya will be 0 and the VAT payable will be 126,000 minus 50,000. Answer, 76,000. Kung ikaw naman ay engage in gambling, franchisee ka ng gambling, then yung covered by the franchise will be subjected to 5% percentage tax. Itong not covered by the franchise will be subjected to 12% VAT. So, ganun uli, 50,000. So, same answer lang to, no? So, kopyahin na lang natin to. 26,667. Franchise tax will be 24,500 and the value added tax will be 67,200 minus the prorated VAT. Okay? Input tax rather. So, ito yung answer. If you want to pause, then take your time, pause it out. If not, if you are ready, then we can proceed to other topics. Next on our list ay Section 120, Tax on Overseas Dispatch, Message, or Conversation originating from the Philippines. Otherwise, ang tawag ko dito ay Overseas Communication Tax. Overseas Communication Tax. Section 120 is Overseas Communications Tax. OCT. OCT. So if you see the OCT, Overseas Communication Tax, tandaan ninyo, yan ay OCT stands for October. October. Why October? Because October is the 10th month. Ay, mali yan. Is the 10th month of the calendar year. So if you want to use that as a method or as a tool in determining or in your recall, then okay yon, no? 10% off. Sabi dito, there shall be collected upon every overseas dispatch, message, or conversation transmitted from the Philippines. Yun yung pinaka-importanting bagay dito. Transmitted from the Philippines. So para siyang exportation. No? Ang direction ng communication dito ay palabas. So kung dito lang yan sa loob, domestic calls lang siya, whether tawag dito, long distance or not long distance, yun ay subject sa regular na 12% VAT. Pero kung ito ay ilalabas, ang direksyon ng tawag mo ay galing sa Pilipinas, ang tinatawagan mo ay nasa labas ng bansa, yan ay overseas communication as contemplated by Section 120 and it will be subjected to the 10% overseas communication tax. Paano po pagpabaliktad? Galing sa labas ng bansa yung tumatawag, ang tinatawagan sa Pilipinas, hindi subject sa tax sa Pilipinas yan. Dapat kung sino yung tumawag, doon yung source, doon yung magkakaroon ng tax liability. Sabi ng Section 120, hindi daw pinapatawan ng overseas communication tax ang mga sumusunod. Okay, wait lang ha. Dahil ako ay pinaglalaroan ng So para maalala, yung mga entities na hindi pinapatawan ng overseas communication tax, tandaan niyo yung sidekick ni dito, ni Darna. Yan, sidekick ni Darna. Si Ding. Letter D stands for Diplomatic Service, I stands for International Organizations, N stands for News Services, and G stands for the Government. DING. Itong mga to, kahit mag-overseas call sila na mag-overseas call, they will not be imposed with the overseas communication tax imposed under Section 120 of the tax code. Okay, so for the problem, we have here overseas dispatch from Manila to Canada, from Manila to Cagayan de Oro, Manila to Cambodia, Canada to Manila, and domestic calls non-long distance. Magkano ang business tax? Kung yung amount na nakikita ninyo ay wala pang tax component, magkano daw ang business tax? Kung ang mga amount na nakikita ninyo ay meron ng tax component. Pause the video if you want to answer, but if not, you can proceed. So ito ang magiging computation natin. Manila to Canada. Itong first two columns, ito yung answer sa unang dalawang tanong. Wala pang tax component. Itong last two columns, ito yung ilalagay natin for those na meron ng tax component. On the assumption na itong mga amount na ito ay meron ng tax component. Okay. Manila to Canada, palabas to, so times 10% overseas communication tax. Manila, long distance calls Manila to CDO, Manila to CDO will be subjected to 12% VAT. Telewriter exchange Manila to Cambodia will be imposed with, ay mali itong question nito, VAT pala. Dito siya sa kabila. Manila to Cambodia, so may 10% yan. Canada to Manila, wala. Papasok kasi siya. And ito, non-long distance calls times 12%. Basta local calls, domestic calls, whether long distance or not long distance, subject sa 12% VAT. Sa inyo mga sagot natin, overseas communication tax, 60,000, VAT, 20,400 on the assumption that these amounts are exclusive of the tax component. On the assumption that the amounts are inclusive of the tax component, itong 50,000 ay times 0.1 over 1.1. Bakit ganon? Just like sa VAT, times 0.12 over 1.12. Ito dahil 10% yung overseas communication tax, ang factor natin na gagamitin ay 0.1 over 1.1. Ito, long distance calls, 120 times 0.12 over 1.12. Itong telewriter exchange times 0.1 over 1.1. Tama ba? Okay. Itong Canada to Manila, wala. Itong domestic calls, non-long distance, 50,000 times 0.12 over 1.12. Kung merong input tax, ibabawas mo siya. Pero kailangan mo siyang i-allocate. Kaya lang wala namang information about input tax. So kung sakali lang na merong input tax din, you have to allocate the input tax kasi hindi lahat ng transaction niya ay batable. Kailangan mo i-allocate para mo malaman kung magkano yung portion ng input tax niya ang allocated doon sa batable transactions niya. Okay? So this will partially end our discussion on percentage tax. And then see you on the next slide, video. Thank you.